My future daughter-in-law left my son when she thought my family had gone bankrupt. But on her wedding day, I was the first one to appear. The story began the first time my son Fergus brought Elena home to meet the family. The moment she stepped inside, she looked around our old wooden house. Then she curled her lip and laughed. It was a smile filled with condescension and contempt. She whispered something so quietly, yet it was enough to silence everyone in the room. I can't believe people still live in a run-down place like this these days. It looks more like a filthy livestock barn. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. My name is Roderick. I spent 40 years building my empire from nothing with my own two hands. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment with the number 1 so we can begin this story together. I own thousands of acres of land and a construction company that leads this region. Yet I have always chosen to live simply. I love the smell of soil. I love the honesty of hard-working people. My son Fergus is a good man. But everyone makes mistakes in life. And he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He brought Elena home. Elena walked into my house wearing expensive high heels. Her eyes immediately fell on the muddy boots I had left by the door. She looked at me as if I had stepped out of some inferior world, as if I were a parasite, contaminating her sight. Throughout dinner she complained nonstop. The wine was too bitter. The steak was too tough. The air in the house was too suffocating. Fergus sat beside her trying to smooth things over. He told her that his father had worked very hard to build everything here. Elena cut him off. She dropped her fork onto the porcelain plate with a sharp clatter. Then she said manual labor was only for people without intelligence. She went on to say that after marrying Fergus she would sell this trashy farm. She wanted a penthouse apartment in the city center. She wanted a real life. It was her very first time meeting her future husband's family. Yet I felt like I was encountering a person unlike any I had ever met before. Inside my mind I thought to myself, she is the most disrespectful woman I have ever met. How could she ever become my daughter-in-law? I looked deeply into Elena's eyes. I could not find even the smallest trace of love there. All I saw were numbers dancing behind them. She stared at the antique painting on my wall and began estimating its value. She thought I was just a foolish old man lucky enough to have some property but too ignorant to enjoy it. She had no idea that every inch of land beneath her feet belonged to me. Every brick in that house had been soaked with my sweat. Anger began rising in my chest, not because she insulted my family, but because she was mocking my son's love and the honesty of this family. She was deceiving my son behind a carefully crafted mask. Fergus was still blind. He thought she was simply a strong-willed young woman with a little attitude. He could not see the claws hidden beneath that elegant makeup. I stayed silent through the entire dinner. I watched how she held her wine glass. I watched how she glanced at my old watch. She thought it was fake. She thought we were poor people pretending to be dignified. Her arrogance was her greatest weakness. She might fool my inexperienced son, but after more than 70 years of life, I had seen too many storms, too many kinds of people. It was not difficult for me to recognize someone who only cared about money and glittering luxury. Someone who would gladly step on anyone to get it. I took a deep breath and looked at my son. At that moment I knew exactly what I had to do. I could not allow him to destroy his life because of a woman like that. And perhaps it would also become the most valuable lesson he would ever learn. I needed a test strong enough to tear away her mask. Right then, I decided that I had to discover the truth about this girl. But what happened afterward was something I never expected. That night I could not sleep. I stood by the window looking out at the fields dark as ink. Fergus walked into my room with a worried expression. He knew I was not pleased. He was about to speak, probably to defend Elena. I raised my hand to stop him and told him to sit down. I looked straight into his eyes and asked only one question. Do you truly believe she loves you for who you are? Fergus was silent for a long time. Finally, he said that Elena simply had a strong personality and spoke her mind. He said she had grown up surrounded by comfort and wealth, so she was not used to life here yet. I gave a faint smile. I told him there is a difference between being straightforward and being cruel. I told him what I had seen in her eyes, the hunger for wealth, the contempt for working people. But Fergus remained stubborn. He said I was being too harsh. He said he would marry her whether I approved or not. My heart tightened in my chest. The glitter of luxury had blinded him. I knew words would not change his mind. At that age, advice rarely works. I knew what I had to do. If I wanted my son to believe the truth, I needed proof. I placed my hand on his shoulder and made him an offer. I told him we were going to play a game, a very fair and polite game, a game that would test a person's heart. If Elena passed the test, it would prove she truly loved him, and I would raise both hands in support of their wedding. But if she failed, then Fergus would learn a very valuable lesson, and of course there would be no bride. Fergus looked at me with suspicion. I continued, "If you agree to this, you must fully cooperate and play your role in this little performance. This is your future we are talking about." He hesitated for a long moment, but eventually nodded reluctantly. Then he asked me what I was planning. I told him we were going bankrupt. Our company was drowning in debt. Millions of dollars. The bank was about to seize everything. The farm, the house, the machinery. Everything would disappear overnight. Fergus's face turned pale. He looked frightened. He asked if that would be too cruel. I asked him a question in return. "Do you want to know who she really is? And of course, as I said before, you must help me perform this act. We will cancel every credit card. We will wear our oldest clothes. We will sell the luxury cars. We will show her a family standing on the edge of a financial cliff." Fergus stood there frozen. I could see the conflict inside him. His love for Elena was real, but he also wanted to prove that I was wrong. He wanted to prove Elena was not the kind of person I believed she was. That was why he agreed to help me perform the act. That night, the two of us sat together and planned every detail. We called a trusted lawyer. We prepared fake debt notices. We created a perfect story of financial collapse. I knew the result would hurt my son. I knew it would break his heart. But I would rather see him suffer once than watch him suffer for the rest of his life. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house grew heavy. I was no longer wearing my neatly pressed suit. Instead, I had on a worn shirt with frayed shoulders, sitting blankly at the dining table. I did not say a word. I simply stared at the stack of fake documents in front of me. Fergus came downstairs with dark circles under his eyes. He glanced at Elena, who was touching up her blush in a small mirror. She was still chattering endlessly about the designer items she wanted to buy for the wedding. She had no idea a storm was coming. She had no idea the luxurious life she dreamed about was about to dissolve into thin air. I took a deep breath and began to play my role. I picked up one of the debt notices, letting my hand tremble slightly. I waited for her to notice me. I wanted her to be the first person to witness this collapse. The air in the living room became thick and tense. I sat on the old wooden chair with my fingers tightly interlocked. On the table were the bright red notices I had prepared in advance. Fergus stood near the window, staring outside with a vacant expression. He was acting convincingly. Or perhaps he was genuinely afraid of the truth we were about to reveal. Elena walked into the room wearing her expensive silk dress. In her hand was a magazine featuring luxurious wedding venues across Europe. She tossed the magazine onto the table and immediately began complaining to Fergus about the coffee machine being too slow. I pretended not to notice. Without looking up, I slowly pushed the stack of papers toward her. My voice came out rough and strained. "Elena, there is something I need to tell you both. Our company is in serious trouble." Elena frowned. She picked up one of the papers and scanned it quickly. The smile on her lips vanished. Her eyes stopped on the number showing millions of dollars in debt. Then she noticed the bank notice announcing the seizure of assets. I continued speaking. "A major project in the north collapsed. We invested everything into it. Now all our assets have been frozen. This farm and this house are both mortgaged. The bank will come to repossess everything within 30 days. We have nothing left, Elena. Nothing except enormous debt." Fergus stepped closer and gently held her hand. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Elena, I am sorry I did not tell you sooner, but I will not let you suffer because of this. Please trust me." The room fell into a terrifying silence. I watched every change on Elena's face. Shock turned into suspicion, and finally, pure disgust. She yanked her hand away from Fergus. Then she looked around the wooden room she had always despised. Now it seemed to her like a dark hole ready to swallow her whole. Her voice stuttered. "What do you mean bankrupt? What the hell are you people talking about?" She began pacing back and forth. Then she suddenly walked over, wrapped her arms around. Fergus buried her face against his chest and said softly, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." For a brief moment I saw a spark of hope in my son's eyes. Even I paused for a second. But that spark of hope vanished almost immediately. The performance she was about to deliver was faster than either of us expected. Only a few minutes later, her attitude changed completely. There was not a trace of sympathy left in her eyes. She looked at Fergus as if he were a defective product. She suddenly shouted, "You never told me your family was going bankrupt. You let me dream about a royal wedding while you are completely broke. Were you planning to make me carry the debt of this farmer family with you?" Fergus tried to explain. He said love was more important than money. He said as long as they had each other they could rebuild everything. "I won't let you suffer," he told her. Elena burst into laughter. A cruel, bitter laugh. "Can love pay off bank debt? Can love buy a house? Are you planning to use that love to throw a wedding in the middle of this grass field?" Then she started frantically gathering her belongings. She threw the gifts Fergus had given her onto the floor. She declared that love to her was a luxury, and she could not waste her youth on a man who was broke and drowning in debt. I sat there and watched everything. Every word she spoke was like a knife cutting into Fergus's heart. My son stood frozen. He had finally seen the true face I had warned him about. Elena had never intended to stay and face hardship with him. She was nothing more than a parasite already rushing to find a new host the moment she saw the tree about to fall. Before leaving, she looked at me one last time with pure contempt. "I should have trusted my instincts from the beginning about this old barn you call a house." She slammed the door so hard that the family photo on the wall fell and shattered on the floor. Fergus collapsed onto the ground. I walked over and placed my hand on my son's shoulder. I knew this pain was necessary. Pain like this shapes a man. But I also knew Elena would not leave quietly. She still had other cards to play, and this was only the beginning. The next morning Elena returned to the farm. But she did not come to apologize. She arrived with a sharply dressed man in a suit and 2 large bodyguards. She walked into the house without knocking. Her posture no longer showed the slightest hesitation like the night before. She looked at Fergus and me with naked contempt. Then Elena threw a stack of bills onto the table. They were invoices for luxury items she had purchased using Fergus's secondary credit card over the past month. She demanded that we pay them immediately before the bank froze all the accounts. At that moment it was clear. There was absolutely no cure for a person like this. Her attitude changed completely. She was no longer the sweet, polite woman she had pretended to be. Elena began insulting my family with the most vicious words imaginable. She looked around the wooden house once more, and then spat onto the floor. She said this was the most disgusting sewer she had ever stepped into. Then she shouted directly at my face that I was a fraudulent old man. She claimed I had used a respectable appearance to trap her inside a miserable family. "Your family deceived me. You are nothing but bankrupt people pretending to be rich." She pointed her finger at Fergus. "You think I loved you? Look at yourself. You are just a fool with no brains. Without the name of this company, you are nothing. I spent so much time and effort putting on a good performance for you. I tried to tolerate the smell of mud and these cheap dinners, and what do I get in return? Nothing. A complete loss." Fergus stood there, his face burning red with anger and humiliation. He could not believe the woman he planned to marry could say such things. But Elena was not finished. She began mocking the debt our family supposedly owed. She said we deserved to be thrown out onto the street. She demanded that the relationship end immediately. She declared that being with Fergus was a stain on her life. She said she wanted nothing to do with him or with our family ever again. She even insulted our ancestors. She said the farm should be flattened and turned into a landfill. The man who came with her gave a quiet, mocking laugh. He looked down at me as if he were superior. Then he suggested that I should sign a document authorizing the sale of some old machinery so Elena could receive compensation for her emotional suffering. Compensation for emotional suffering. It was ridiculous beyond words. But I remained silent. I let her reveal every piece of her true nature. I wanted Fergus to see clearly every crack in the character of the woman he once loved. Elena gathered the last of her belongings. She pulled off the engagement ring and threw it directly into a plate of leftover food. She said that cheap piece of jewelry was not worthy of her finger. Then she turned around and walked away without looking back once. Fergus watched the luxury car belonging to that man speed away through the cloud of dust. My son did not cry, but I saw his hands clench so tightly that they turned white. He had just learned the most expensive lesson of his life. I knew Elena had already found a new target. She was not the kind of woman who would suffer for long. She had prepared her escape the moment she realized our ship was sinking. She thought she had won. She believed she had escaped a pile of ruins and was sailing toward a new paradise. What she did not know was that everything was still under my control. I had been watching her every move for quite some time. But what surprised me was the man she chose next. He was not a stranger to me. He was someone I knew very well, and he was hiding a secret far more terrifying than my little bankruptcy performance. Less than a week after leaving our farm, Elena reappeared on social media looking radiant. There was no trace of the exhausted or distressed woman who had just broken off an engagement. Instead, she was posting photos from the most luxurious five-star hotels in the city. In one picture, she stood on a yacht holding a glass of champagne. Beside her was a young man wearing an expensive designer suit. It was the same man who had come to my house with her. His name was Julian, a man known throughout the region as one of the most successful young businessmen around. Elena kept posting sarcastic updates on social media. She wrote that she had finally escaped the darkness and stepped into the light. She showed off a new diamond ring much larger than the one Fergus had given her. She proudly declared that this was the life she truly deserved. She did not hesitate to imply that my family were nothing but poor frauds. She wanted the entire world to know that she had found a better destination. A place with real money, not empty promises and the smell of mud. Fergus sat in his office scrolling through those photos. His face hardened. I could see him struggling not to throw his phone against the wall. Julian in those pictures looked dazzling. Luxury cars, lavish parties, business-class flights. He was giving Elena extravagant gifts that even at Fergus's wealthiest moment he had never thought of buying. Elena seemed completely intoxicated by that wealth. She photographed every corner of Julian's mansion. She wanted to provoke us. She wanted to prove that leaving Fergus had been the perfect decision. I looked at those photos and simply smiled. Unlike Fergus, I was not angry. I found it amusing. I knew Julian. I knew this so-called perfect businessman very well. I knew what stood behind those shiny suits and those borrowed luxury cars. Elena thought she had caught a big fish. She believed she had finally stepped into high society. What she did not realize was that she had just jumped from a pile of ashes into a blazing pit of fire. Her greed had blinded her to the most obvious signs. The irony of fate was that Elena was proudly displaying wealth that did not truly exist. She was using Julian's artificial glamour to hide the emptiness inside her own soul. The more she bragged, the more pitiful she appeared to me. She was building a castle of sand right on the edge of a volcano. Fergus looked at me and asked why I remained so calm. He asked if I did not see that she was insulting us. I simply patted my son on the shoulder and told him to be patient. The truth always finds a way to reveal itself when people least expect it. Meanwhile, Elena began planning what she called the wedding of the century with Julian. She wanted it to be the most extravagant event this city had ever seen. She wanted to invite everyone she knew so they could witness her triumph. Invitations were sent everywhere. But there was one thing Elena did not know. Julian was not wealthy at all. In reality, he was nothing more than a puppet in a dangerous financial game, and the man holding the strings of that puppet was none other than me. A truth was about to surface that would shatter Elena's entire dream into dust. I held a thick stack of financial documents that the private investigator had just sent over. Numbers do not lie. Julian was not a successful young businessman. He was a professional fraud, hiding behind a glamorous image. He used money from one investor to pay off another. A disguised pyramid scheme that was already beginning to collapse. The luxury cars and yachts Elena kept showing off were all rented or purchased on installment with shady loans. Julian was standing on the edge of real bankruptcy. But the most interesting detail was this. Julian had borrowed a massive amount of money from an anonymous financial company to maintain his luxurious lifestyle. That company belonged to me, hidden behind several layers of intermediaries. I looked at the loan contract with his signature on it and allowed myself a cold smile. He was not rich. He owed me millions of dollars. Every luxury dinner Elena enjoyed, every designer handbag she proudly carried was being paid for with my money. Fergus stood beside me, staring at the documents in disbelief. He read the reports again and again. Then he asked why I had allowed all of this to happen. I told him I had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. What surprised me was that Julian had been targeting our company for quite some time. His plan was to use Elena as a pawn to infiltrate my family. Elena had agreed to tolerate our old house for one reason only: to marry my son. After that, she would use Fergus's love to manipulate him into selling this land to Julian for far less than it was worth. And when Fergus was no longer useful, she would walk away. It was a ruthless plan, and on paper it was nearly perfect. The only flaw was that Julian chose the wrong people to play his game. Because I saw through it and moved one step ahead, the hunter had unknowingly become the prey. I picked up my phone and called my assistant. I gave a simple order: begin collecting every debt tied to Julian's assets. I wanted him to feel the collapse at the exact moment he believed he was standing at the peak of his success. His loan was about to reach its deadline, and I had no intention of extending it for even a single day. I wanted Elena to watch her perfect man fall apart. She abandoned my son for money, so she would pay the price through the very thing she worshipped. Meanwhile, Elena was busy attending wedding dress fittings. She posted pictures of gowns worth tens of thousands of dollars. She wrote about a bright future beside her wealthy fiancé. She had no idea that debt collection notices were already arriving at Julian's office. She had no idea those luxury cars were about to be repossessed. She was still drowning in the fantasy of the most extravagant wedding this city had ever seen. I looked at Fergus and told him to prepare his best suit. We were going to attend that wedding, not as defeated men, but as the ones holding their fate in our hands. The storm was coming, and it would sweep away every lie. If you have stayed with this story until this moment, it means something about it has held your attention. So I would ask one small and quick favor. Please subscribe and like the channel. Many people watch without doing so, and it costs nothing, but it means a great deal to us. And that debt was about to come due. I had prepared a special wedding gift for Elena, a gift she would never forget for the rest of her life. The wedding day finally arrived. The grand hotel in the center of the city shimmered with lights and fresh flowers. Elena had achieved her dream, a lavish wedding exactly as she had always imagined. She stood in the main hall wearing a wedding gown covered in sparkling diamonds. She smiled brightly as she welcomed guests from the upper circles of society. Her eyes were full of triumph. She greeted familiar faces from our old circle with an air of superiority. She did not hesitate to retell the past as if it were one of her proudest victories. Luckily, I escaped that bankrupt family, she told a group of her friends. She laughed loudly while describing the old wooden house and the smell of mud from our farm. She said that a person only lives once and must choose a place worthy of standing among the elite. What she did not know was that behind the backstage doors, Julian was sweating profusely. He was desperately calling creditors, begging for a few more hours. Debt collectors had already begun wandering around the hotel parking lot. Fergus and I sat quietly inside a black car parked across the street. Fergus wore his finest suit. His face looked strangely calm. The anger was gone. He was simply waiting for justice to arrive. I glanced at my watch. Exactly 6 o'clock. The ceremony began. Soft orchestral music filled the hall as Elena walked down the aisle over a red carpet covered with rose petals. She looked radiant like a queen. Julian stood at the altar, his face pale beneath layers of makeup. He forced a stiff smile as he watched Elena approach. He had used the last of his money to rent this hotel. His plan was simple. After the wedding, he would use their marriage to squeeze more money out of Elena's social connections. A con artist marrying a greedy opportunist. A perfect union of corruption. Elena took Julian's hands and looked into his eyes with false admiration. She believed she had finally reached the peak of luxury. Then she began to read her vows. She spoke about true love without selfish motives. She spoke about having the courage to leave poverty behind to find the true meaning of life. The irony was almost unbearable. The audience applauded. They had no idea they were witnessing the greatest comedy of the century. I opened the car door. I adjusted my collar. Fergus followed closely behind me. We walked into the hotel lobby. The security guards tried to stop us, but all I needed to show them was a black card and a court authorization document. They immediately stepped aside and lowered their heads. We walked straight toward the ceremony hall where the music was rising to its climax. All eyes slowly turned toward us. Whispers spread through the crowd like waves in the ocean. Elena froze the moment she saw us standing at the end of the aisle. The smile on her face vanished. In its place appeared anger and contempt. She believed we had come to beg for help, or perhaps to ruin her perfect day out of jealousy. She released Julian's hand and walked toward us, ready to deliver one last insult to throw these bankrupt men out of her wedding. At that moment I stepped forward. My steps were slow but commanding. The sound of my shoes echoed sharply across the marble floor. I did not look at Elena. I looked straight at Julian. Her new husband nearly collapsed the moment he saw me. The entire hall fell so silent that Elena's heavy breathing could be heard. She stood in the middle of the aisle, blocking our path. Her face twisted with rage. She shouted, demanding to know how we dared to bring our poor faces into a place like this. She ordered the security guards to throw these beggars out immediately. She said she did not want the smell of farm mud contaminating the elegant air of the hall. Fergus said nothing. He simply looked at her with pity. That look made Elena even more furious. I stepped forward and stopped in front of Julian. He looked like a walking corpse. Sweat poured down his forehead, smearing the expensive makeup on his face. I looked directly into his eyes. I did not raise my voice, but my calm words carried clearly through the hall. I apologize for interrupting the ceremony. I am only here to settle a debt. Elena burst into laughter. She called me a crazy old man. She said our family owed millions to the bank and had no right to demand payment from anyone else. She grabbed Julian's hand and told him not to be afraid of these lunatics. Julian said nothing. He was trembling so badly he could barely stand. I slowly pulled a bright red notice from my jacket. "This is not my family's debt notice," I said. "This is an emergency asset seizure order for Julian." Then I turned to face the guests. I introduced myself as the chairman of the financial group, currently holding 90% of Julian's outstanding debt. I calmly explained that everything in this wedding had been purchased with borrowed money. The wedding, the gown Elena was wearing, the flowers, even that oversized diamond ring. All of it was funded through illegal loans. Elena's face went pale. She looked at Julian, then back at me. Still stubborn, she insisted I was lying. She shouted that Julian was a young millionaire and demanded that he throw me out. But Julian lowered his head. He could not look at anyone. I opened the thick file in my hands and began reading the numbers out loud. One by one, I listed every loan Julian had taken under shell companies. Then I announced the court order freezing his assets issued just 1 hour earlier. The crowd erupted in whispers. The wealthy guests slowly stepped backward as if afraid of being contaminated. Elena began to panic. She grabbed Julian by the collar and shook him violently. She screamed at him, demanding to know if it was true. She begged him to say it was just some cheap trick. Julian remained silent. That silence was the cruelest answer of all. Finally, he collapsed to his knees in the middle of the aisle. He begged me for more time. I looked at Elena. Just moments ago, she had proudly declared that she had escaped poverty. Now she stood in the ruins of her own lies. She stared at her expensive wedding gown as if it had suddenly turned into rags. She realized she was not a queen. She was nothing more than a puppet in a collapsing play. She turned toward Fergus. But my son had already turned his back. The contempt she once showed us had come back and crushed her. I dropped the debt notice at Julian's feet. Then I told them calmly that nothing here belonged to them anymore. The bank was already waiting outside. Everything would be taken. The luxury cars. The penthouse they planned to move into after tonight. Everything. It was over. I lifted the asset seizure order and began reading it slowly, word by word. The entire hall held its breath. Elena was trembling so badly that she could barely stand in her high heels. She clung to the wedding podium as if it were the only lifeline she had left. But that lifeline was sinking. I looked directly at Julian and spoke calmly. "He is not a businessman. He is my debtor. And just before this wedding, he used your name to sign a high-interest loan." Elena's eyes widened as she stared at Julian. She could not believe what she had just heard. Julian remained on his knees. He did not deny it. He had tricked her into signing a stack of documents she believed were part of their marriage paperwork. In reality, they were debt guarantee papers. Now Elena was not only bankrupt, she was responsible for a massive debt she could never repay. The truth struck her like a brutal slap across the face. Chaos erupted inside the hall. The elegant guests quickly began leaving, unwilling to be associated with a fraud scandal. Hotel staff started removing decorations under my orders. Meanwhile, the loan collectors Julian owed money to had already entered the lobby. They had no respect for the glamorous wedding dress Elena was wearing. They demanded that she remove every piece of jewelry, the gemstone necklace, the diamond earrings, and even the wedding ring she had proudly shown off just moments earlier. Elena finally broke down in panic. She screamed and pushed away the men approaching her. Then she looked at me with desperate eyes. She called Fergus's name. She cried that she had been deceived. She said she still loved Fergus. She begged us to save her from this disaster. But Fergus remained where he stood several steps away. His eyes were cold as ice. He was no longer the foolish young man she once manipulated. The luxurious wedding had turned into a tragedy. The rose petals scattered across the floor now looked like dried stains of blood. The orchestra had stopped. Instead, the hall was filled with shouting and desperate sobs. Julian tried to escape but was stopped by creditors at the entrance. Elena was left alone in the middle of the ruined ceremony. Her wedding dress tore along one side as she struggled to keep hold of the ring. I walked slowly toward her. I looked down at the woman who had once insulted my family without mercy. In her eyes, I saw complete collapse. Her arrogance had vanished. Only raw fear and desperation remained. She grabbed the hem of my trousers and begged. She promised she would do anything if I helped her escape the debt. She promised she would return to the farm. She promised to take care of Fergus and me for the rest of her life. I slowly shook my head. You are not worthy. I have no need for the service of a traitor. I gave you a chance to choose love, but you chose fake wealth. And now you must live with the consequences of that choice. Her assets were seized. Her reputation was destroyed. Debt surrounded her from every direction. This was the price of endless greed. I took one last look around the hall. Justice had been done. Fergus stepped beside me. He was ready to leave. We had nothing left to say to these people. But before walking out of the hotel, I turned back once more. Elena was still screaming in despair. I stopped at the entrance of the hall. Elena's screams slowly faded behind me. I looked at her one last time. She was kneeling among the shattered remains of her glittering dream. I spoke in the calmest voice possible. My family was never bankrupt. We only wanted to know who you really were. Elena froze. Her eyes widened in disbelief. I continued. All those debt notices at the farm were fake. My company is still the leading one in the region. My farm is still thriving. We gave you a test, and it was also a great opportunity. You failed that test in the worst possible way. You threw away the greatest opportunity of your life with your own hands. Perhaps you never noticed because you chose the wrong way to live from the very beginning. Fergus once truly loved you. Elena's mouth fell open. She crawled toward Fergus, begging for forgiveness. Her words stumbled over each other. She admitted she had been wrong. She said Julian had manipulated her. But my Fergus was no longer the naive man she once controlled. At least she had taught him that lesson. And once a man learns that lesson, he never repeats the same mistake. Fergus looked at her one last time. Then he turned away. He did not say a single word. He had recognized his mistake. He had grown through that pain. And in his eyes I saw peace. Our family left the hotel and drove back to the farm. The fresh smell of grass and the clean country air welcomed us home. That was real wealth. Loyalty and kindness can never be bought with money. Elena now had to face the police and Julian's creditors. She chose money. Now she would live with debt. Later that evening, we sat together at the old wooden table. Fergus took my hand and thanked me for saving him from falling into an abyss. Our family was now more united than ever. We had protected the most valuable things in life. And in the end, greedy people always pay a heavy price. This lesson will last forever. Thank you for staying with me through this journey of justice here at Dad's Real Life Revenge. Do not forget to share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe so you will not miss the next hard lessons. I will see you again in the next story. I looked up at the starry sky above the farm. Justice may arrive late sometimes, but it always arrives at the right moment.